Welcome to Unfiltered Veterinary Discussions. I'm Dr. Peter Weinstein. This is one of our special episodes, a long form conversation with a unique individual, a friend, special guest, veterinarian. I'm going to welcome and introduce to you today Dr. Ken Gorczyca. Ken, thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Let me give you a little background on Dr. Ken. He is a veterinarian. He's a veterinary end of life doula. He is an artist. And if you see the video of our conversation, you'll see some of his artwork over his shoulders. He's an advocate. He's the founder of A Beloved Farewell. Dr. Gorczyca has spent many decades exploring the deep connection between animals, grief, caregiving, community, and healing. Dude, that's a lifetime worth of work. Decades. He is a graduate of UC Davis, practiced in San Francisco during the height of the AIDS epidemic, where he became deeply involved in HIV/AIDS support work, the human animal bond, and zoonotic disease education. Really important work. Thank you, Ken, for doing that. He's also the founding veterinarian of Pets Are Wonderful Support. And I heard of Pets Are Wonderful Support Paws. It's not just regionalized to the Bay Area. There's some areas of
Well,
paws around the country, aren't there?
well, I would just say that the group that I founded is San Francisco. There's other groups that um, are similar, perhaps, but all individual. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, paws helped individuals living with AIDS care for and remain connected to their beloved companion animals during an extremely difficult period in our history. During that same era, he became a founding member of the Lesbian and Gay Veterinary Medical Association, now known as the Pride VMA or VMC. He helped create visibility, support, and advocacy for LGBTQ veterinary professionals within the veterinary field. Dude, you have done so much in such a short period of time. This pioneering work was supporting people and pets affected by AIDS. Dr. Gorczyca received the Bustad Companion Animal Veterinarian of the Year Award in 2010. And for those of you who don't know about Dr. Bustad, look him up. He is probably the preeminent veterinarian in terms of focusing on companion animal, human animal bond, and those relationships. He also received the UC Davis Alumni Achievement Award for his advancing of the human animal bond and to help and helping to foster a more compassionate and inclusive veterinary profession. Here for more inclusivity. During the April meeting of the AVMA panel on euthanasia, he was appointed to the Companion Animal Working Group, helping shape national conversations and guidelines surrounding humane end of life care and hospice for animals. Today, he blends medicine, ritual, storytelling, music, art, nature based healing practices, and compassionate presence to help families navigate this final chapter of their beloved companion lives. Ken, I think the podcast is done just with your introduction.
Thank you, Peter. I'm so glad to be here, and I hope I can share some wisdom
Oh,
of my elder
listen, you,
years.
you just shared wisdom with your bio. I just want to dive deeply into all of this, but let's get started because I really want to go back to when you were little or younger, at least. When did you first know you wanted to become a veterinarian, and when did you when did you start to move towards animals and caregiving?
I think that, like many of us, we look back at our youth or our childhood. I was deeply connected to animals. I think for me, because I didn't know it, but I was a gay child. I was introverted, or at least outside the box, and so it was difficult for me to be part of groups, and so animals really filled that niche. And I look back at my grandfather, and I felt I really had supportive parents and grandparents, and they saw my unique abilities. And my grandfather taught me three things. One, he gave me my first goldfish, and I got to experience that life as well as death, because eventually it died, and so I had to go through that process. Secondly, he taught me how to plant seeds and bean seeds and gardening, and I'm still an avid gardener today. And finally, he taught me how to paint by numbers, and I became that became one of my passions in my life, is painting. So I think that I look back, it was probably part of who I was. My father was a physician in the military, in the army, and so I had a lot of medical support within the family. And but I really was more connected to animals, and I look back at all the different animals I had in my life. My first dog, um, who we Candy, who I we all of a sudden she disappeared when I was younger. She had bitten someone, and they said that she sent her to a farm, so that really affected me. My guinea pigs that had died, and I created uh, burial rituals, putting them in a shoebox with flowers, all on my own, and I tried to acknowledge that moment. And all the way through all the animals that I've had. But yeah, I always wanted. I just knew that I was going to be a veterinarian. I had lots of great mentors. Dr. Calvin Schwabe was my probably my biggest mentor in at Davis, and he told me when I was in undergrad, he said, "Do something that you really want to do, and it'll help you. It'll be okay to get into vet school." So I chose. I became an atmospheric scientist, and I got my degree in meteorology, and that surely helped empower who I am as well, just nature and so yeah.
There are all sorts of stories, things no, I never even knew about you. Okay, I have to ask the question. What was the goldfish name?
I think Goldie for sure. Yeah.
Why did I expect that?
And I just want to mention one thing. I look back at that. And I remember when he died, of course, then they just flushed him down the toilet. It's like I look back and I'm just horrified because later in life I always buried my fish, and I know they didn't know, and there wasn't support in those days, and even when my dog Candy was taken away. We were moving in the military, and it had bitten a neighbor, and I look back and I understand why they might have gotten rid of him, but I didn't know as a child that was my best friend, and so that really helps me a lot in today's world when I know that I'm working with behavioral euthanasias and we're with children, and so I really all these episodes of my life have really helped formulate who how I work today.
So, from meteorology to vet school at UC Davis, when you got into veterinary school, did you have and that was a really challenging time when you were going to veterinary school. It was an interesting era in the profession and the world, especially up in Northern California. When you attended vet school, did you have any idea what you wanted to be once you graduated?
I didn't, I don't think. I just wanted to be a veterinarian, but what I would say what did happen in veterinary school that changed the direction of my life is I realized that I was a gay man, and that was during veterinary school, and I said, "Oh my God, I'm in the middle of one of the most conservative professions there are, the rural, agricultural based schools, and there was no support. There was not. It was. I was scared, that I going to be able to be a veterinarian. And I was also grew up in the Catholic Church, so I was in the so that was also a conservative institution, and so I had to find my own way, and I did. I was lucky at Davis in California. There was new support groups and outside the school, and that really allowed me to find other like-minded people. But and then eventually I did an internship at Penn in Philadelphia, and it was a whole different story because it was an urban center and there was a huge gay community, and so I was embraced by my colleagues, and I felt that I could be a veterinarian and also be a gay man, and so it was really that was part of my story, I guess.
Yeah, that whole time in our history, it was most gay people were not willing to share their feelings. I mean, you were had to keep it to yourself, and so that had to be an extraordinary amount of stress on top of all of the issues that you deal with just going to veterinary school. So I got to give you credit for dealing with that challenge at the same time you're dealing with anatomy and microbiology and rounds and everything else.
Yeah, I mean, I look back and I made it through. I guess it was but it was stressful, and I know that um, you're worried about getting reviews for doing internships or getting, and in those days, most gay people in the profession were closeted. Even in there was no uh, faculty that were out, even though looking back, there was tons of faculty members that were gay, and um, and that's even been true even through the following decades. It's still true in a lot of places. It's just you have to protect your professional place. And in some certain parts of the country, or now maybe in the whole country where we're moving backwards, it's a real issue. And that we can talk later, but that's how it led to helping to form the Lesbian and Gay Veterinary Medical Association.
So you graduated, you went to Penn, and then you went to the Castro district in San Francisco during the height of the AIDS epidemic. And that had to be an incredibly emotional and formative time. I mean, here you are just building your confidence as a veterinarian in an environment and a time that had to be exquisitely challenging. So can you talk a little bit about being a veterinarian in San Francisco at the time of the HIV/AIDS epidemic and trying to balance all of those different things?
Well, yeah, it brings emotions in a way, but um, I knew I wanted to be in San Francisco, and so I started interviewing for jobs, and I went back in the closet in a sense. I didn't share my gayness to my employers. I was afraid. And I think they all knew I came into interviews with disco pants or whatever. So it was pretty obvious, and it didn't matter, honestly. People were accepting, but um, I think the biggest issue was that this was really the dawn of the AIDS pandemic, and I came into San Francisco in 1984, and the pandemic had been sort of percolating for maybe 2 years, 2 or 3 years, and there was a lot there. We didn't know what was causing the virus, what was really happening, and there was a lot of fear and anxiety, um, and I just recall my very first client that I saw at Arguello Pet Hospital, where I got a job, was a physician who we had a discussion about what is the risk of animals for people with AIDS. And at that time, physicians treating people with AIDS were telling their clients that they should get rid of their pets for prudent reasons, perhaps. We didn't know what was going on, but we didn't know where the virus came from, but we also knew that there was a lot of diseases that people with AIDS were coming down with: salmonella, toxoplasmosis, campylobacter, cat scratch fever. It goes on and on. And so to be prudent, they were saying it's time to get rid of your pets. Well, as a veterinarian, I knew that animal companionship was so powerful, and my colleagues or my clients that were being told this had lost their job, they lost their family members, they were sick, and the only love companion in their life was their animal. So it didn't make sense to me, and so from that point forward, it became really a big part of my practice or to really understand zoonotic diseases. And I would go to the UCSF library. This is before there was internet and before, you had to do the cards and look up articles. And there really wasn't much on zoonotic diseases and immunosuppressive illness. And so, but I started to compile this and created what I called the Safe Pet Guidelines. And I wanted to create a document for my clients that they could give to their physicians and say, look, it's okay. There's ways to make a pet safer. You can feed them, don't feed them raw foods. You give them, make sure they're vaccinated and taken care of, and wash your hands, and be careful around litter boxes, and and so that work eventually was published, and we can talk about that. And it took about 10 years for the profession to get on board. Professions are very slow, and it then became part of the CDC's website, Healthy Pets, Healthy People, maybe a decade later, and it's still there. I assume, I don't know, I'd have to check because they might have taken off these types of things from the website if it has LGBT mentioned. But I think the real story that I can share was I became I got to know a lot of the local gay physicians in San Francisco. There was no veterinary group, and so I did find a gay group called Bay Area Physicians for Human Rights. And so I forced myself to go into these meetings and meet people. And I met a lot of really good friends. And one of them was named Dr. Stephen Walters, and he had two um, Cocker Spaniel dogs. And he ended up developing cerebral toxoplasmosis. And his illness was he started having hiccups, and they wouldn't go away. And eventually they were able to diagnose that he had lesions in his brain that was causing the hiccup center to keep going. And I remember him being in the hospital with all his physician friends, and they started talking. Well, you probably caught toxo from your dog. And I knew at that moment that there was so much misinformation out there that that's where I really got hunkered down and started to do the safe pet guidelines. And I was on the board of the San Francisco Veterinary Medical Association. And when in those days, maybe the same, when you're a new graduate in town, they put you on the board, say, aha, a new blood. And I was the secretary, I think, and I stood up at a meeting soon after Stephen's hospital visit. And I said, all right, guys, we're living in San Francisco. We have the AIDS pandemic at our fingertips. Our clients are asking questions. Let's bring in let's have a discussion about public health and zoonotic diseases. And in that meeting, I was turned down because the veterinarian said, that's not our problem. That's not our um, we don't want that. And it was probably a vocal minority, honestly, looking back, but people were quiet. And that day I resigned from the board. I said, okay, this group is not going to be supportive of what's happening. And so the very next day, I was reading in the Bay Area Reporter, and there was a feature story on the front page, and it was a group called Pets Are Wonderful Support for People with AIDS and ARC. And it was just a new group that was helping provide pet food and some supportive care. And I called the founder, and I became the founding veterinarian. And that's where I was able to have my Safe Pet guidelines published because they supported me. But even there, it wasn't easy because zoonotic diseases is a very nebulous topic, and not everyone understood that. But I know that it made a difference, and I just find it's sort of I'm a believer in synchronicity and spirit, and so these things all sort of interwoven into my story, and I then spent the next decade really helping create Pets Are Wonderful Support, where it became um, that we did dog walking, we did foster care when people went in the hospitals, because initially people would go in the hospitals and the animals would be left in their rooms, and the same thing with COVID to happen. And then they needed help with pet food. There was a pet food supply that we created, and they needed help with veterinary care or transportation. And what I found in that work was that people, I mean, this was a big volunteer organization, and people really in San Francisco and across the country really wanted to help with pets. They understood that necessary need. But when they came to volunteer, they met someone that was dying that had AIDS, and it turns out they became connected and friends with these people. And that was really the power, was the animals brought us in. And of course we helped the animals, but it was really creating this support system for not only the volunteer, but for the person. And I'm really proud to say that the organization's still in existence. It's not the same. It did expand to help other disabilities, and it became part of a larger group called the Shanti Project, which helps people with disabilities but that power of the human bond it's one of the few AIDS organizations that still is in existence. And so all these others have disappeared, but the human bond kept this alive. And so I'm really proud of that work. And I know it made a difference across the world because these groups did pop up all over the world, and it was run by volunteer belief systems of supporting the community. Yeah.
You should be proud of the work, and you should be proud of the Safe Pet Guidelines. I think the sharing of information and knowledge that is accurate and useful is something that we really don't do a good job on. And the fact that when you were involved with organized veterinary medicine and the group didn't have the vision and the direction to understand One Health and zoonotic disease and feel that it was relevant had to be extremely frustrating. And it probably motivated you even more, because that's how veterinarians work, probably motivated you even more to strengthen the Pets Are Wonderful support and the advocacy that you were doing from that standpoint. And it was a very challenging time, because not only did we saw the separation of pets and people due to the challenges of AIDS and the misinformation, but you probably lost a number of friends and colleagues and cohorts. And so you're dealing with people with grief losing their pets. You're losing friends from that standpoint as well. And all of these things had to be foundational to the work that you're doing right now. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that period of time, probably more than any, has 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 given you the focus for the work you're doing now.
No, you're right, Peter. And I look back and I lost probably 300 plus clients. I lost dozens of friends and colleagues. Veterinarians were dying as well. And hundreds and hundreds of them have died who and not counting veterinary staff, but they were never recognized or acknowledged, and it was and I am proud that I had mentors like James Harris, who was on the Human Animal Bond Committee of the AVMA. And he always told me, he says, Ken, the best way to help move a profession is to work from the inside. So he was the chair of the committee, and so he took my work into the profession that way, and eventually the profession acknowledged it, and it became part of they had JABMA articles and stuff like that. At the same time they were doing this, there was always it was there were letters to the editor that were anti-gay all the time in the JABMA. How could these people be allowed to be in this profession? So it was really quite a world to live in, and people can't imagine maybe what it was like, but it was true. Um, and so I did learn a lot from this. I think I think that I learned that if someone says no, to me that's yes. Okay, I don't take no for an answer, because I find that professions or organizations tend to be have walls, and they tend to move very slow. They're not willing to take risks or to do what's right. So as an outsider, I've been able to do that, and so it's given me strength. And I know that in my work as a veterinary end of life doula or end of life at home euthanasia veterinarian, it surely has, with death on my shoulder, it's allowed me to go deeper, and we can talk more about that. But yeah, no, I think the AIDS pandemic was a pivotal part of my life. And I should mention, for a full story, is I ended up was diagnosed with HIV as well. I was infected during veterinary school. I had just come out that first year, and there was no, and I didn't know for many years, but I was sick. And eventually I did have to stop working for the disability that it gave me. But I kept going. I continued doing my volunteer work. Um, I helped create the Lesbian and Gay Veterinary Medical Association at that point, because I knew that no one else was going to be able to do it, because I mean, there were, of course, colleagues that helped me, but it took someone that was willing to be the pivotal point, because so many people were afraid for their careers still, and so I worked with many great colleagues, and I found that the ones that worked in government, let's say, were protected by by the anti-discrimination laws, were able to do this work, but people that were in private practice that had bosses or whatever, they couldn't do it, um and so m- my my path being my career being cut short at a young age was also pivotal, and so I was fortunate to have really caring family and parents, and they supported me, and I went back into that family womb until I could get back on my feet, and I survived. And I guess one of the things I wanted to say to all your listeners is, as veterinarians, we're given a real privilege to understand medicine. And I can say that one of the reasons I'm here is I didn't follow the standard medical treatments for HIV in the early days. I understood that AZT was a cancer drug, and I knew that if you were on AZT for life, you were going to develop cancers just from the drug. And it turns out, um, it I was right. The initial usage of AZT was very high doses, and it actually killed people that probably didn't have to die. Of course, everyone wanted to protect themselves and do what they could to survive because you were given a year life expectancy, you know. But it turns out that not everyone had to take it, and I waited at least a decade or no, 2 decades. I did alternative therapies and stress reduction and nature therapy, and I did my art um, and that I look back and it was my knowledge as a veterinarian that saved my life. And I think all of us probably have done similar things for our friends and family. I know with my own father, who was in hospice, and he had a very rare prostatic infection, and the doctors saying he's dying. And I got the the name of the bacteria, and I went to friends and found someone in Denmark that was treating it, and they said, "Oh my God, put him on gentamicin right away," and he lived another 7 or 8 months. And so, but I guess what I've learned from all this is you need advocates no matter what you do in this medical world. And I guess my point is veterinarians are really, really good medical advocates. And I don't know if we really acknowledge that in a way, but I think many of us probably have had that experience.
Absolutely. And just quickly, love James Harris. Thanks for giving me a shout out. I've met him a number of times. I think he moved to New Zealand, if I'm not incorrect.
Tasmania.
Tasmania's, yeah. Well,
Yes.
I love Tasmania, so that's why I love James Harris. Talk about advocacy briefly. Um, you talked about the LGBTQ association that you kind of were involved in getting kicked off. You have to be pleased to see where Pride VMC is now and the exposure that it's helping with the veterinary profession and the understanding and the support that it provides for individuals of all sorts of different beliefs. So you got to be pretty proud with the advocacy that you're seeing now with Pride VMC.
I am. It was an act of love to begin with because I wanted to support my gay and lesbian colleagues. And initially it was lesbian and gay. And of course, then we learned that it was bisexual. And then we learned that it was transgender. And it became much bigger. And that's why we eventually changed the name to Pride Veterinary Medical Community, mainly because the younger generation said, wait a minute, you're not, older guys aren't really being inclusive. And so I do believe that the youth in our profession are sometimes the biggest leaders in change and changing help change the profession, and they're not domesticated yet. They're still willing to share their truths, and that's I just want to give a heads up to all the veterinary students out there that you can change a profession. And the journey of the gay veterinary community really um, was quite a slow process. It was we figured we just have meetings at the AVMA once a year. We would uh, have a cocktail party or just a little reception, and we would have maybe 10 people would show up, and the many times it was the AVMA leaders eventually started showing up, and we were trying to help promote them to be supportive, and many were. And then, of course, we expanded to include the student groups at the different universities, and they initially had their own name, Broad Spectrum, because again, they didn't feel that our group encompassed all of them. And eventually, we all united, and I'm really proud of what they've done. They've taken it to so many different levels, and Mia Carey, of course, was a big leader in that, and I'm really so appreciative of what she's done. And of course, Janet Donlin with the AVMA, they've done so. They've all our profession is very much part of they've embraced diversity, even at a time when this world in this country is so much going in the other direction. They haven't given up as far as I can see, although it's a challenging time, honestly, and I'm very, very much fearful for our trans members. It's a real crisis. And I hope that we all can be supportive as we can in all that we do because uh, it's it's as veterinarians, we all know that um, gender and sexuality is such a continuum. We should be the leaders in understanding that with the world because we see it in our animal world all the time. There's guppies that change sex to from male to female. If you don't have, there's the cows that do, they use the the homosexuality or in cattle that are in heat we know so much and of course there's intersex and there's all these things and in our modern world it's a duality and it's not a duality and so I once got Joan Roughgarden to speak at the AVMA back in it was probably 20 years ago and it was on this she had written a book called Rainbow of the Animal Kingdom or something like that. And it was and I got we got her to speak at the AVMA and it was a well turned out lecture. And but after that, the AVMA changed their rules. They didn't let private groups have lectures because it was about it pushed their buttons even then, and it's I just find that these things are the cycles continue, and it never goes away, really, change and but I do think that we as veterinarians have a real big role to help in this discussion.
I would love to spend the next day talking to you just about advocacy and all the things that you've talked about, but then we would miss out on what you have done currently to extend your past experiences. And you introduced me to a term that I had never heard before when we were talking in the past, and that was the term doula. And I heard it recently, I think, on an episode of Grey's Anatomy, but it had to do more with delivering babies than delivering end of care life. And so tell me, what is a veterinary, where does the word doula come from, and what is a veterinary end of care life doula, which is your current passion?
Sure. Well, the word doula comes from the ancient Greece term. It was women helping women give birth, and so that was really it's a midwife, basically, is what we say in the modern world. There's always was that terminology, but in ancient times, and now more recently in the modern world, there also were death doulas and people that help people die. Because the truth is that birth and death are just two parts of the normal part of the natural world, and so most recently, I guess I'll step back a little bit. I was trying to figure out what to do with my next phase of my career after and I do a lot of nature therapy, and I go out. I found a group called the School of Lost Borders that takes people out into nature, into the wilderness, where you do vision fast, where you go out alone for 4 days and 4 nights to try to get into an altered space and allow nature to help you find answer a question, perhaps. And mine was what am I to do with my life? And it became apparent in that retreat in Death Valley, which was one of my favorite places to be, that death was always been on my shoulder, and that was really the focus I should go to. And so when I came out of that retreat, I started Googling death and veterinary medicine, and two things popped up. One was the companion animal end of life, companion animal euthanasia training academy with Kathy Cooney, and the University of Vermont's companion animal end of life doula program. And so I immediately connected to both. I took the class, the doula class at the University of Vermont, and I took the training academy class as well. And I found that the profession had really changed since I was in school, where we weren't taught about death other than you give them pentobarbital and in their vein and then they die, and I just, looking back as a child, I knew there was much more to death, and I was so glad to see the profession had really evolved, and it's not just a medical procedure necessarily. There's more to it, and so when I did this doula class, I found my language, and I found that what a doula a death doula is supposed to be a non-medical person that helps. the physician and the client, let's say in the human world, move through this. They're an advocate, they're a companion, they give resources. And that can be the same with the veterinary world. There are people that are taking these classes that want to help people. But it's been my experience that many of us as veterinarians or veterinary technicians or veterinary staff already are doing this role, that the end of life, medicine and spirit merge. And it's already there. We don't necessarily know the term. And so we already are trying to offer this sacred space and it's and I like to use the term end of life navigator. I think that might be more appropriate for the veterinary profession because doula can be, it depends on the part of the country you're in. If they, in California, it's accepted, and but if you go to the Midwest, they think you're woo-woo and you're out of your mind. And so I think using the word navigator or guide might be, and I'm a believer that every practice should have somebody that takes on that role. And that's one of my goals as I move in this work is to try to help empower veterinary practices to take on that for their clients because they're euthanizing all the time. And if you can have someone to help guide the client, where they can example to say that they're coming for euthanasia. Well, they don't have to come into the exam room. Someone goes out to the car, brings them to the back way so they don't have to experience that shame perhaps of or they have now a lot of people places have special rooms, I don't want to call it a chapel room, but a space where there's a couch and there's not the metal table where you're putting, and allow people to have, can have candles, you can have extra treats, even giving chocolate at the end of life is okay, and I think that the veterinary technicians and veterinary staff really are primed to do this. Veterinarians are so busy, they can't take on that role. Now, end of life, at home euthanasia vets, I think that all of us are doing that. We're giving space. We usually, in my practice, we have an hour at least at the home where we can go through that. And we can talk more about how I've evolved in that work. But I'm a believer that veterinary medicine can get better, and we are getting better. And as for the doula work, I know I think it was Nicole Kidman recently said she's a death doula, so that became a big thing in the world, and it is happening. There is more discussion about it, but I think that we, as a veterinary profession, already are um, death doulas because that's what we've been doing. And I just want to mention that there's also this growing lay population that wants to help in that role, and we're all pioneers. I'm not sure how that's all going to fit in, but if you run into someone that wants to do that, just be kind to them and see if they can maybe fit into your practice.
So, briefly, can you give an idea of how your approach to end of life differs from the more traditional end of life companies that are out there? If you were to tell somebody, if somebody were to call you and say, "How does your approach differ?" What would you tell them?
Sure. Well, I'll just step back first and say that when I came, the other third thing that happened after my vision fast was I reached out to my colleague Ari Rozicki, and he had founded a Gentle Rest, and I said, "Can I go out with you on a call?" And I went out that first day, and I was immediately knew that this is the work I was going to do. It was just so he was so kind. He was quiet. You didn't have to say anything other than a few things and just be present and allow for these moments. And so I started out with a great mentor and I've been working in San Francisco for the last 4 years just to help. I've probably euthanized over 2,000 animals, and so I've really gained a lot of experience. And my practice has changed, and it's mainly through the work with the University of Vermont. After I took the class, they asked me to be the veterinary facilitator for the class. So I've been teaching there as well. So I've gotten to know a lot of uh, the students and all the tenets of doula care. And so what I do now is I come into this I call it a sacred moment. It's a ritual. And I sit down with them and I do storytelling. And the very first thing I do is I say, I want to get to know your dog or cat, your bunny, your rat, your bird. So let's start with the origin story. And I go through and how did they get their name? How did they, what were they like? What do they travel? What are they a foodie? Have you dressed them up for Halloween? Have they ever run away? Have they, do they have a best friend? How have they been in their golden years? What have they taught you? That's one of the biggest things I ask. And at the end, people tell me no one's ever asked these stories. And they find it really, really, I find it's an empowering moment because they can now look at the love story. They've been waiting all day to have a euthanasia and they're sad and they're scared and they don't know what to expect. And I come in and offer them some solace. And sometimes they laugh. Yes, Rover stole the turkey off the table for Thanksgiving, and so it breaks that moment of grief. And and then what I do also, I mean, of course, we all do the sedation shot, and then we do the euthanasia, and then we allow them to have time. But I always ask them, is it okay then if I offer a ceremony, a ritual at the end? And through my work in spirituality. I did 5 years with Michael Harner in the shamanic healing work, and I try to bring in ceremony and ritual, and it's not religious. It's just more acknowledging this moment. This is when we're releasing the spirit of this beloved animal, and I use bells, and I repeat the story. I use some sandalwood or sage, and I read a poem. It's a very short thing, but it's just sort of acknowledging this moment. And I'd say I always ask first because and I say 97% of the people, it's okay. And if they're not, they say, I'm not religious. I said, well, it's not a religious thing. And then they usually will go through. And if they're not, I don't, these are their own personal journeys. So I let them be. And then afterwards, after they have their private time, and I encourage that. I think there's a lot of beauty in the moment of death in the body, and in fact, it's something that's lost in our society about what death is about. I know when my grandmother died in the '60s, I remember she died at home, and they left her body in state in the living room, and we got to experience her body going through rigor mortis and through the changes, and that's something that we've lost in our modern society. But I believe that with at-home euthanasia that we're starting to allow society to understand death. In my own world, when my own animals have died, I've kept them overnight in vigil, and I've allowed them to. I've had candles and flowers and lots of grief and crying, and experience that. And for some clients, that's what I encourage that as well. They can. Some people want that ability to be in present, but most don't have. I then we'll wrap them what I call in a blanket, but it's really a shrouding, a sacred shrouding. We use beautiful blankets, and or put them in a basket that's really beautiful, and then take them back to the car, where they can say goodbye. So I try to use all the terminology and words that we learned from the human world of death and bring it into the veterinary world, and that's sort of my what I hope to encourage as we move forward.
In an unhurried, unrushed, relationship focused approach to things as opposed to a transactional approach to things.
Yeah, and not everyone. I mean, I understand in veterinary brick and mortar practices, we're rushed. We have so many, doing euthanasia is not. No one wants to necessarily do that. It can, especially if it's a client or an animal that you've known their whole lives. It's like it's really a lot of veterinarians take on that grief themselves, and it's part of our with in our profession. They've done studies that euthanasia can attribute to that work that we deal. And so, but it's still for our own clients, it's really probably one of the most important appointments we ever have with them. And I would suggest if your practice is too busy or you don't have the ability to do that, it's to your benefit to refer to at-home euthanasia vets. We're there to support you as part of the team. We're not there to. Oh, I see it.
We we use the end of life, you use the end of life very well to extend the human animal bond and to support the grief process as well. The the approach that you take is really very supportive of pet owners. And having been in practice, I can suggest that maybe I was not great and that we weren't great because we were rushing and we had other things to do and we needed the room. Um, do you think we're starting to see, and I think at-home euthanasia has kind of grown probably maybe just before the pandemic and was starting to get some foothold. Have you seen a growth in at-home euthanasia and its ability to help extend the human-animal bond and to bring the patient and the family's life full circle during those experiences? Do you think there's a positive to that at-home euthanasia brings to the table?
Absolutely. I mean, I since I've been involved since 2020. Gosh, that's already 6 years. I guess it's hard to, time flies. But I have, I've gone to many of the IAHPC conferences. I've been a member of that. The CADA, I've watched what the profession is doing. Even the AVMA now has lectures on death and dying. It took me 3 years to get on the schedule. They kept pushing and pushing, but they said doula, doula. But finally, I changed it to navigator or whatever, and I was able to get in. And so I do see that, and I see a lot of people taking on this role. Um, there's, of course, the corporate world that's doing some of that work as well, like Lap of Love. And I think that my personal belief is that all of us in this work are doing this sacred work. I mean, we're giving the client space. I mean, I can only do so many in a week, I mean, I wish I could be there for everybody, and so my role is to hopefully help educate others to be able to do that work as well. And uh, yeah, no, for
Yeah.
sure.
I mean, it's not easy. We talk about compassion fatigue, but there's an emotional component of it. There's a certain amount of your emotional energy that you share during those experiences. So, um, what message would you share with your colleagues and others to help them understand and to handle the emotional side of um, at-home euthanasias or euthanasias in general? Because it really is it's emotionally draining.
It can be. For me personally, I get to be with this client for an hour, and I find it really empowering personally, and so because I know that I'm doing something for not only the animal but for the family, and but at the end of the day, I mean, we only do four a day. I mean, we try to limit how many we can do because it is exhausting in that sense. And I don't even remember the clients. By the end of the day, they're no longer in my sphere of remembering. I wish I remembered them all, but I guess I contain it in a way. And I try. I think that for me, I realize I have to also schedule time in nature, and on a more regular basis because I that helps me. And so I plan to do that. Um, and as for what other people do, or what to recommend, I think that for practices, I would say it'd be important to number one, empower someone or a team to take on that role. Take these classes on the end of life doula or Decada classes, really let them empower them to be, and there are people that will do that in your practice, and they become the experts, and they love it. I mean, at least the ones I've run into. Um, Make sure you have death rounds, talk about it, I mean, don't make it just to be something at the end of the day, but make sure that you can really share with everybody because it's not easy. I think that I don't see it in the brick and mortar practice because I'm not there. I assume that there's a lot of euthanasias that are going to make people upset. Is it a behavior euthanasia? Is it a convenience euthanasia? Is it or just a financial euthanasia. I think we're seeing more and more of that. And I don't judge people because I personally couldn't afford $10,000 for a end of life surgery when it's only going to get another 2 months, and I think that one of the things I would tell our colleagues, and it's true with humans too, that we push animals and people way too far. And and it's not fair, because yes, we give them all the options, but are you really being honest with them that they're only going to get a little bit of time? And some people will keep going and going and put their families at risk because they love their animals so much, and they're willing to use a credit card. And but is that really the best for the animal and the family? I don't know. That's a moral decision, I think. But I think that when we have these corporate practices that are forcing people to keep getting higher and higher income streams to get paid, then maybe we don't look at the real end of life issues that are where we don't get paid as much, and um, so yeah, it's a hard one.
Yeah, I mean, this is another topic we could spend hours talking about. One of the things I mentioned early on in the conversation as we kind of try to come towards the end here, Ken, is the artwork on the walls behind you as we're having this conversation. And you are an artist, a writer, a poet. I don't know if you sing or not, but maybe you do.
Uh,
Um,
Only with AI, but the Suno app, and we can talk about that.
but
Um,
do you find that the artwork and the poetry and all of those other act as a um, kind of a mental support to help you through the work that you do and to act as a distraction in many cases. So talk about that and talk about vet art now and kind of give people an idea of some of the things that you've done outside of the doula role and outside of the AIDS advocacy role that have helped you become an even more rounded individual.
Well, as I mentioned in the beginning, my grandfather taught me about gardening, animals, and art, and art became a passion for me. I always said that vet school distracted me, and I had to stop during that. But then when I had to do an early retirement, and then I started painting all the time, it became a passion. And so I've been a painter for my whole life, and I find my favorite painting is going out in the nature and doing plein air art where I sit on the ground and I just capture these moments. But I also do animals, and as the one behind me, the ice bear I called it was on the cover of JABMA, and so as a veterinarian, I felt obligated to do animals as well, and so I enjoy that, and I do commissions for clients if they want. Um, and I've been a member of the Vet Art Now group. It's a group of veterinary artists. That's veterinarians, veterinary technicians, veterinary staff, along with my friend Yoli and who Kirk. I always get his name wrong. You could probably know.
Yola Kerpenstein?
That's it. Yes, and a few others. And we created this little network of veterinary artists because we realized that there's a lot of us out there. And so we started having our first art shows at the AV Make conference. And now we're, I think, into our fifth year. We're going to have another one coming up in Orange County. But VMX started to take it on, and we've been having art shows there. And it's just a way of allowing veterinarians, the veterinary community, to share their creativity. I think it's really an important part of healing in general. And so I go to our website, Vet Art Now, and you can see some of our work. And our theme for this coming up show is, I think, nature, perhaps, and that includes all animals or animals in nature. And so if you are an artist, then join us. We're on Facebook as well. Um, but I just want to get back to my doula practice because one of the other things that I do that I find really supportive to my clients is I take that story that I've taken notes on, and I'm a believer in AI, using it as a tool. I mean, I know that there's a lot of controversy, but all artists have used tools throughout history, when there was a lens or a camera or whatever. And so I take that and you can put it into AI and create a obituary poem for the client. And so I do that. And then I was at a client's appointment and they said, Dr. Ken, look, I created this song for my animal. And I was like, wow. And I realized I could start using these poems and put it to music because if you use the Suno app, um, you can create amazing songs. And so I started doing that. And so at the end, after the appointment, then I will make this poem and I'll create a song of their love story and I will send it to the clients. And I know it affects some people. I just got one response today. Please send me the download so I can save it forever. People really find that the love story in music is really, really powerful. And I think that we all can maybe do it. Takes time. It's not for everybody, but for me, I enjoy listening to these songs more than listening to the news, you know? And so, and I'm hoping that in the near future I'll be able to do a YouTube channel to be able to share this because I think that what I do when an animal dies is I'm trying to send these songs to the actual veterinarian so that they can also get joy from this moment and it helps them feel empowered, you know, and I think that there's going to be some movement. Some clients think that I'm singing and I have to be, and I say, no, it's not my voice. It's the Suno app. But so I have to, I wish I could sing, but I don't. But you can do Broadway shows, tangos, you know, swing songs, blues songs, country western. I listen to the client. What are they about? And that's how I create the songs. So that's my,
I
and
think
I also, you can use the AI you can use the Prisma app and make art pieces from their pet portraits. And so I try to use that because I don't have time to be a painter for everybody, you know, but I do try to help bring creative forces into this moment. And I think it helps heal, you know, and when they remember the true story of their pet.
I think that's a great place to wrap. You mentioned Vet Art Now as a place to find out more about you. Do you have a website specifically for yourself that you can send people
Sure.
to?
I have two websites. One is kengorsica.com. That's my art website that you, and also you can find some of my doula work at abelovedfarewell.com. And I try to I'm trying to bring some of this work there as well. And so those are the two. And you can reach out to me. I'm glad to talk to anybody. And I realize that these podcasts are just one way to try to bring this work out. And I really appreciate you, Peter, for allowing me to share some of my story. And I hope it's helpful to people.
Ken, listen, we could have spent hours talking, and unfortunately, we have just a limited amount of time. But your story is inspirational and aspirational, and I hope that our listeners got the message, and I hope they want to help contribute to the end of life story, so it's not the end, but the life of the story from that standpoint. So I want to thank all of you who are part of the unfiltered veterinary discussion. And Ken, final word?
Well, there's two things. I do want to just say that there's another group I'm part of. It's called Open-Minded Scientists, and we're doing studies on the end of life moment of animals and what ancients already knew, but we're finding that a lot of you out there in the veterinary world might experience this, but we find that electronics can change where all of a sudden a song comes onto the phone was out of the blue. We see glowing lights. We feel wind in the office when the animal dies. Children look up in the air. And so we're trying to scientifically quantify that because there's something there. And so that's another place if you're interested at openmindedscientist.com. And yeah, I just want to say this. I think we're all pioneers in the end of life, you know, and although the ancients knew it, you know, they were way ahead of us, and then we lost it in the 50s and when we started dying in the hospital rooms and veterinary, you know, the animals died in the veterinary clinics, and now we're moving home. You know, we're dying at home in hospice a lot of times for humans, and our animals are dying at home as well. And so there's a whole movement back to that being quiet, being in a sacred space. And I hope that uh, I know that the veterinary profession will get there. You know, with AIDS, it took 10 years. With the gay group, it might have taken 7 years. So maybe with death, it'll be 5 years. But we're getting there. And these conversations, I think, just helps give us a spark of what's possible. So thank you.
Ken Gorczyca, thank you very much. On behalf of the team at Unfiltered Veterinary Discussions, thanks for being a part of our podcast. You can find us on all the different platforms that are out there. And please keep Ken's words in mind as you go through the day, because I do believe they will help you think differently. And really, we need to think differently. So thank you again, Ken.
You're welcome.